I founded Power for People 3 years ago, and my background is in parliamentary campaigning. I've run a number of campaigns for environmental laws, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of them a bit later. I really felt that campaigning the way that we do, which is grassroots mobilization to get specific changes to legislation and regulations through Parliament, is very effective, but a bit strangely, there's very little of it actually happens. A lot of the big environmental organizations don't really do it. And I really saw a need for an organization that campaigns on climate change, to stop climate change, that uses that method. And so that is what Power for People does. We focus specifically on energy. We have two aims. The first is to accelerate our transition to the UK's transition to renewable energy. This is, of course, essential and perhaps the biggest piece of the puzzle with regards to the UK's participation in stopping the climate crisis, because it's just the scale of renewable generation that we need is enormous because of the need to electrify transport and heating. So that's the reason that we focus on energy. But the second thing, which is equally important, is that local communities must benefit from the transition. This is so essential because if they do not, we could be seeing resistance. We have seen obviously vocal resistance from, it is a minority, but we have seen a fierce vocal minority to things like onshore wind turbines. But then if you look at other countries, a good example is Denmark, where there are strong rules in place to allow communities to benefit directly from the new renewables infrastructure that gets built. In places like Denmark, you have communities that will say, when projects are planned, they will actually say, please build it here, because they know that the community is directly going to benefit. And so we run campaigns that are aimed at achieving both of these things. And our flagship campaign at the moment, which we'll be focusing on tonight, is the Community Energy Revolution, which is for the local electricity bill to be enacted. But before I continue, I'd like to just introduce you to three of the campaign team who are here with us tonight: Mike, Rupert, and Heidi. And they're just going to say a little hello to you. So, Mike, would you like to say hi?
Hey everyone, I'm Mike and I'm the Communications Manager at Power for People. My role involves managing our website, social media channels, and putting out other digital comms. I'm also responsible for answering queries about the campaign and writing to your MP, so a few of you may have heard from me already. I'll also be feeding your questions to Steve tonight, so if you could please just put anything you have or any comments in the chat box. We'll try and answer as many as possible after Steve's presentation.
Great, thanks, Mike. And Rupert, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Rupert. I am a campaigns assistant. I've been with Power for People for just over a year now. I work predominantly to coordinate with local and national organizations, as well as working with Steve on MP engagement and mailouts, and a little with Mike on social media. It's lovely to see you all here. Thank you very much for joining us. It's nice to put some faces to names. So I'll be in and around the chat box as well.
Great, thanks, Rupert. And yeah, please do feel free to communicate with the team or with each other, perhaps, in the chat as well. And finally, Heidi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heidi. I'm also a campaigns assistant at Power for People. I'm the newest member of the team. I joined just this year, which is great. I mostly assist with raising funds, assisting to raise funds for our campaigns activities. I also liaise with supportive MPs, organisations and councils to build the strength of the campaign's supportive coalition. Yeah, again, it's really nice to see you all here and really looking forward to this evening.
Great, thanks very much, Heidi. So let's talk about the main topic of this evening, which, as I say, is the Community Energy Revolution, our campaign to get the local electricity bill into law. And I shall start with talking about what we simply call the problem. So here is a good beginning of illustration of the problem. So 3,000 megawatts, that is what a government report in 2014 said that by now we could have in community renewable energy generation capacity. And yet at the moment, we have around 280 megawatts of community renewable energy generation. So we are not even a tenth of the way to where they said we should be by now. And they said that 6 years ago. And to give you the context, that 280 megawatts, that's less than 0.5% of the UK's entire electricity generating capacity. Of course, there's hope there. 3,000 megawatts really is substantial. And what was also really good about that report and other evidence as well that has been published is that 3,000 megawatts of community renewable energy generation is not the ceiling. That's what that report said, that by 2020 we could have had with the right policies and government action. But there's a lot more that could be there. Our estimate is that if we are successful in changing the rules, which is what the local electricity bill would do, and getting the right framework in place, then we could see at least 6,000 megawatts in 5 to 10 years. So that would represent about 10% of our current UK's entire energy generated capacity. And that's the kind of scale that we really want to see, we really need. So one of the main reasons, not the only reason, but one of the major reasons, probably the number one reason why that enormous potential of community renewable generation is not being realized is that community energy schemes can't sell directly to local people. You and I cannot buy our electricity from a local energy supplier. If you are in your kitchen and you look out into a field or onto some roofs nearby and you see a wind turbine or solar, you cannot buy the electricity that is being generated by whatever project that owns that generation. The reason for this is ultimately down to antiquated market rules. So in the early 1990s, when the energy system was privatized, a whole series of new rules were put in place to govern the new market. And it is then the energy regulator, Ofgem, who runs it and who sets these rules. And they made sense at the time. Back then, we had obviously very large power stations generating electricity and sending it out across the grid. And as we all know, things have dramatically changed since then. We obviously have renewables that are coming on. They are coming on at scale. They now make up a quarter to a third of the amount of electricity used each year. But the rules have not caught up. And as I showed earlier, there's an enormous potential for community renewable generation, but the rules just do not allow for it. They are blocking it. It is the rules that are blocking it. So obviously the need is to change the rules, but what the rules ultimately create in terms of this inability to sell the local renewable electricity directly to local customers, insurmountable costs. So if you want to be a licensed supplier, because you have to be licensed by the energy regulator Ofgem. If you want to be a licensed supplier and to sell to local customers, or indeed any customers, you face really high costs. The estimate is well in excess of £1 million just to set up. And that's why we only can buy from nationally operating energy utilities at the moment. It's these costs. It's not actually illegal. You could, if you wanted, set yourself up and sell just to local customers. But the costs involved are enormous. And so there's absolutely no business case. It doesn't stack up. The financials don't stack up. An analogy that I like to give, and this one goes down very well with MPs that I've spoken with as well, is a microbrewery. where imagine I want to brew local beer. I want to set up a microbrewery, a little business, and I'm obviously going to need a van to deliver my beer to local pubs and cafes and restaurants. And it all looks like it's going to work. I'm obviously going to need to get some funds together. Maybe I'll crowdsource the money. Maybe I'll offer shares, or maybe I'll get a loan from the bank. But it looks like it financially would work. Then when I go to register my van, I'm told that I need to spend £1 million a year. I need to pay £1 million a year because it's using the national road network. So obviously the whole business, the microbrewery, would be impossible. It would never be started. And this is really what community energy schemes are facing. They can't. They would love to sell, and we've done a lot of case studies as well, and we continue to do them. I'm going to talk a bit more about community energy groups in a moment, but they are telling us that they would love to sell directly to local customers, and if they did, they would then love to build more renewable generation, but they can't. These costs are far too high because of the rules. So I want to sort of highlight just how wonderful the existing community energy projects we've got are. Here's Westmill Solar Cooperative out in Wiltshire. So as you can see, quite an impressive solar array there with some wind turbines in the back as well. Here's Donside Hydro in Aberdeen, the first. It's actually you can't really see the city, but it's in a residential area of Aberdeen, the first residential hydro project in the UK. Actually, that's an Archimedes screw behind them, which obviously generates steadily throughout the year. These groups are fantastic. There's about 500 of them across the UK. And that might sound a lot, but it really isn't. You know, it really should be so much more than that, as that government report I mentioned earlier alluded to. They're mainly staffed by volunteers. This is Bannister House, actually in Hackney, where I live in East London. And obviously a project there where they've got together and they've put some solar on the roofs. It's great. But they are just generating, and then they are selling as a contract to a national utility, and then the end customer obviously buys from that national utility. And they, as I say, they are largely volunteers. They are people who really put in a lot of time and effort to make it work. It's really a labor of love with a lot of them, and it's obviously it's just not flourishing at the scale it needs to. There's wonderful examples of what a lot of these existing community energy groups do in terms of, we highlighted one recently where they were taking some of the revenues they make and contributing it to the local food bank. They put money into energy efficiency schemes. They educate people on how to improve energy efficiency in local homes. And there is a huge list. And if you look at our social media feeds, there's a lot more good stories there. So they're absolutely fantastic. But I mean, you know, that their generation is making up less than 0.5% of our total generation, and it needs to be a lot more. So, you know, wonderful benefits that could be reaped by communities everywhere. So let's talk about the solution then. It sounds very simple at the headline level. We need to enable local renewable energy generators to sell directly to local customers. So we want to create a situation where we can all have the ability to buy our electricity off a local energy company. That could be community owned, it could be a cooperative, etc. And that means we've got to change the rules. We've got to change the rules governing the market. And that's why we've drafted legislation. We need Parliament to change the law so that the energy market regulator, Ofgem, changes the rules that govern the market, those antiquated rules. Interestingly, we actually had a debate on the bill, some of you may have seen, back in October, where a large number of MPs stood up and said positive points, which was great. And then the energy minister, who must respond, was there. And whilst the government don't support the bill at the moment, they are currently quite neutral. The energy minister is Kwesi Kwarteng MP. He did accept exactly what I'm saying. He did accept that the energy market rules are antiquated and they are not fit for purpose and they do need reform. So we are, I think it's fair to say, we're pushing an open door here. It's a heavy door that needs to be pushed hard. It's not going to swing open easily. But the wind is in our favor, and there is a real opportunity for success here. But I'll talk about that in a moment. So we need to change the rules. We need legislation to do it. Here's the bill. Quite short. A page, only a page. And then you see all the signatures. In fact, there's a lot more signatures now than when this screenshot was done. So the bill would give Ofgem, the energy market regulator, a duty to establish a right to local supply. And as part of that duty, Ofgem would have to ensure that the costs were proportionate. That is the key word in all of this. We need those costs to be proportionate, because if they're proportionate, then community energy groups can make their new offerings viable. They can become suppliers, we can buy from them, and their businesses can be viable. And they will operate at different scales. There might be regional ones, there might be county level ones, there might be collections of villages that create a community energy supplier that we can buy electricity from. It will depend, but if you create proportionate costs, then obviously all that is going to be possible. So the bill contains that principle. And if you can sort of, I know that text is small, but in clause 3, that's where it actually gives Ofgem the duty. Now, you may look at this bill and think, gosh, that's really quite short for legislation, and it's true. And it will get longer. There's more detail that we accept needs to be added. But at the moment, the important thing is it contains the principle, as I say. To just give you a bit more context to this kind of thing, I worked on a number of, as I said, I worked on a number of bills in the past that successfully got into law. I, together with my colleagues, Ron Bailey and Martin Williams, drafted the first version of the climate change bill back in 2005 that then 3 years later became the Climate Change Act 2008. I say I mean, I was pretty junior back then. It was really them who did it and I watched. But the initial bill was 5 pages. When it became law 3 years later, it was 125 pages long. But the important thing is that the principle that was in the final legislation was in those first 5 pages. And that is the same here. It is the principle that you can see on the screen right in front of you of proportioning the costs and creating a right to local supply and making it a rule so that the regulations governing the energy markets are changed, that is in there, and that obviously would stay in there. So what would a local electricity act mean if we are successful? So, like I say, it means we can all buy from a local supplier. That then makes community energy schemes viable. So like I said, those case studies we've done, we know, and we know from the evidence, things like that government report as well, that if you had the local money being spent on a local supplier, then more schemes would actually get built. Think about it this way, all that money that we're all spending on our electricity bills, the vast majority of it leaves the local economy. A lot more of it could stay and circulate. At the moment, electricity generators, like community energy groups, they receive about 5 pence per kilowatt hour for what they generate from their contract with the big supplier. But we as customers, we're paying about 15, it's probably a bit more than that now, but we're paying about 15 pence. So imagine that somewhere in the middle, more of that money is going into local projects. And that's what would make the new schemes viable. And then, of course, we'll get the additional benefits. There would be local skilled jobs and all those good things that community energy groups already do. There'd be a lot more of those things happening. We really do think this could happen everywhere. Villages, towns, metropolitan areas, the countryside, really everywhere. So imagine the Local Electricity Act is law. So how does it actually work? What's the new reality going to really look like? One common question we get is, are we going to be buying our electricity from multiple utilities? How's that going to play out? So the detail on that is not in the bill. As with quite a lot of the detail like that, it would be up to Ofgem, the regulator, to figure out exactly how it is implemented. There's broadly 2 ways that would be answered. One is, it's like at the moment, where we each must choose one single supplier. So I perhaps might go to the new Hackney Energy Cooperative, or I might go to the new East London Community Energy Company. And then when the local renewable generation that they own isn't generating, then obviously I am receiving my electricity off the grid, just as I do now, but I just a customer, and I don't worry about that. That gets sorted out by my energy company. That's one way. The other way is it's more like the way we buy groceries, whereby you don't have a contract to only go to Tesco. You can go where you want, and with the technology that's coming on with smartphones and smart meters and those kinds of things, it is possible in the near future that you could have more than one supplier. You could have an app on your phone that switches you to the one, so it switches you from when the community energy company that you're with is generating, that's where your electricity coming from. But when they're not, you just switch over to whoever you're with at the moment. That could be how it is done. But as I say, that detail is not in the bill. That will be up to the energy regulator, Ofgem, to implement. So, what about prices? Will prices go down? Will prices go up? Prices can't go up because we have price caps. There's already existing regulation, and the bill does not obviously we do not want to change those. The bill does not change those. They are there for a reason. And I think broadly they're a good thing. Prices obviously potentially could go down in certain areas. One thing that the current rules and the current system really doesn't recognize is that the more distributed energy there is, the more efficient actually the system becomes. When you have large power stations generating electricity, sending it out across the grid, the further electricity travels down the wires, the more is actually lost due to heat. It's wasted. So there's a benefit from having more distributed generation and matching the local demand with local supply. And so this would, by setting up this new process in the market rules, this would actually help recognize that. So there will be, there are potential for prices to go down because of that. A common question as well is, what about vulnerable customers? There are rules at the moment to do that where existing suppliers have to make sure that certain vulnerable customers are effectively cared for. There's other rules as well to do with things like, if the supply is cut off, or if an energy company goes bust, their customers don't suddenly all get cut off, and they effectively just get automatically switched to another supplier until things can be resolved. Now, the bill does not seek to change any of those kinds of rules. Those rules are good rules. They're there for a reason, and they will not change. There is, of course, complexity involved in ensuring those rules stay there whilst making the changes that the bill seeks to make. And again, that detail is left up to the regulator, Ofgem. We drafted it in that way. It seemed to be right because they are the most appropriate body. Another interesting thing is that, in a way, this has all happened before. Before the nationalization of the energy system in the 1940s, we had municipal energy companies, and there was mainly gas back then. Obviously, it's not what we want now, but the principle was there, and they made significant revenues. And of course, that whole principle I talked about, where the money that people paid for their energy bills with was circulating a lot more in the local economy because of those municipal energy companies. It meant that the revenues paid for a lot of very impressive and substantial local services and facilities. At the time, public baths, parks, libraries, even Strangeways Prison in Manchester, which I appreciate is maybe not the nicest piece of infrastructure, but it's quite an impressive piece of infrastructure for the time. They were all paid for by the revenues from the municipal energy companies of the day. So in a sense, this has happened before, and there's no reason it can't happen again. So let's talk about the campaign. I'll start with this, tell you a bit about the level of support that the campaign and the bill is currently enjoying. So 66 county and local authorities, that's a pretty good number. The political control of those is very broad, cross-party. There's metropolitan ones, there's county level ones, there's rural areas amongst them. So that's great. It's been great. This is councils basically putting resolutions through where the councils all say, yes, we support the bill in principle. Obviously, it's not up to them to implement it. They stand potentially to benefit, but it helps show Parliament and the government the public support. 65 national organizations, and there's a very broad range amongst them. There's the usual organizations you'd think of, like Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace, WWF, the RSPB, but there's also lots of trade associations. There's Community Energy England, Community Energy Scotland, Community Energy Wales. The bill does not apply to Northern Ireland because Northern Ireland has a separate regulator. And so it can't apply to Northern Ireland. There is the Solar Trade Association, the Renewable Energy Association, the British Hydropower Association. Interestingly as well, two of those national organisations that publicly support the bill are two of the 6 regional grid monopolies that operate across the UK. And it's very interesting indeed that they have come on board and support. They have been lobbying MPs in their regions to back it, which is very, very interesting, very impressive, because some of the upgrades that will be needed to the electricity network, the physical wires that those regional monopolies control, they will probably have to pay for, as well as some of the new IT infrastructure. But nevertheless, I think that they see how important this is. They see the writing on the wall, and this is the direction of travel. So it's great to have them on board. And obviously, we are urging the other 4 and other organisations as well to support. 315 parish, town, and community councils, absolutely brilliant, and 432 local groups. So that's community energy groups, community organisations, and you may ask, oh, well, hang on, if there's 500 community energy groups, why isn't there, way more than 500 in that number? It's because a lot of them really are so small, and because of the harsher and harsher policies that have been placed upon them in recent years, unfortunately, they hardly operate. So, but we've got the vast majority of them. And the headline figure, we currently, to date, as of today, we have 233 MPs backing the bill. And there's the breakdown. So a very broad cross-party support. That's almost every Scottish National Party MP, all the Liberal Democrats, all the Plaid MPs, obviously Caroline Lucas, the Green MP. So there's obviously an impressive number of Conservatives there. But the important thing to say about these numbers and that overall number is that is an impressive number. We are over 1/3 of the House of Commons there, but we need a lot more. From my experience, we are going to need at least, well, I mean, technically, with half the House of Commons plus 1, which is 326, you could obviously win. In theory, you could win any votes that happened, but that's not really how it works, because it's partly to do with the timetable of Parliament, making sure that there's enough time for votes and debates to happen, and the timetable is controlled ultimately and almost completely by the government. And so, really, what I've seen in the past is you need around 400 MPs. In order to then, that sort of overwhelming level of public support that builds that level of MP support is what then leads the government to coming on board and support. And that is our plan. So we have a lot of work to do. It's very encouraging. I get people look at these figures. I had it last night, actually. A gentleman who is the scientific advisor to the Parliamentary Air Quality group. He was absolutely knocked over when he realized this is the level of support last night. And he said, these are his words. He said, wow, you guys are the most effective campaigners in the country. I cannot believe there are so many Conservative MPs and so many MPs backing this. So this is impressive. And indeed, I want to say thank you to any of you who've written to your MP, because this is what creates the success. It's not me talking, it's you taking action. So thank you very much for building this success, but we've got a lot of work still to do. So how do we win? Well, we get 400 MPs. And how do you do that? Well, we need to keep lobbying. But what we also need to do is, when an MP says they support, that's not it. That's not the end of the game. In fact, equally as importantly is, once an MP is supportive, that you continue to urge them and encourage them to promote the bill. They need to be putting pressure on the government, writing to the energy minister. They need to be basically talking to other MPs about it, encouraging other MPs to support it. There is a number of things in Parliament that MPs can do. They can ask questions to ministers. They can do it on the floor of the House of Commons. They can write to ministers formally. There is a range of things that they can do. And so you urging your MP, if your MP already supports, to keep promoting it is very important, equally as important. I've said how many MPs we need. As I say, around 400. You know, it's not a science, but that's the marker. A lot of people ask, well, when's this going to happen? And it is difficult to say exactly. Based on my past experience, I estimate probably within the next 12 to 18 months. So, but again, that is, you know, based on continuing the support, growing the support that we have. And then, of course, there would be some time. So let's say it was 18 months from now, the act was passed. It would then be some time, maybe 6 to 9 months, maybe even 12 months, for the new process to be put in place by Ofgem. And then you would see the actual change where, you know, you and I would be able to purchase our electricity from a community energy company, a local supplier. But of course, it would take time for them to start emerging, hopefully quickly, if we got it right. Can it be done? I mean, I believe so, of course, otherwise we wouldn't be making this effort. But this is challenging. This is hard. This is a major reform that we are working for here. This is not a small thing. This is serious stuff. So yeah, it can be done, but it really is a challenge. It will only be done if you please all help, and if obviously lots of others around the country help too. I cannot emphasize enough, that is the only way these campaigns succeed. It is lots of people helping at a local level. And I want to give you some hope and to give you some inspiration by giving you a couple of examples of campaigns that I've worked on that did win. So this picture was taken in 2003. This was for the campaign for the Doorstep Recycling Act, as it's known, although the actual title is the Household Waste Recycling Act. This is the piece of legislation that introduced the weekly recycling collection that we all put out every week. So every week when you put your recycling out, this is why. And at the time, the government, Labour government at the time, obviously, they were dead opposed to it initially. Now, at the front there in the centre, it was led by Friends of the Earth, but a huge coalition was behind it. You can see Joan Ruddock there holding the plastic bottle. So Joan was a Labour backbencher. She took the bill through as a backbench bill. One of the ways that a bill like this can go through. And next to her there with the jacket is Tony Juniper, who was the chief executive of Friends of the Earth. But again, I emphasize, you know, this was successful because of huge numbers of people lobbying their MPs. And ultimately, the government, of course, said, OK, it is a great idea. And what an effect. The increase in our domestic recycling rate since 2003 when this came law is I mean, many fold over. I think it's gone from it was about 8% or something, and it's now up to obviously way over 50. I think it's around the 60-70% mark. Not good enough, I appreciate, but you know, very effective, very impressive, real concrete change. So here is Hornsey 1. This is the largest offshore wind farm in the world, and it's off the coast of Yorkshire. The UK now has the biggest offshore wind farms in the world. We've also closed almost all of our coal power stations. And the thing that actually made this happen was the Climate Change Act that got passed in 2008, because of the duty that has put on the government to progressively and continually reduce the nation's emissions right to the 2050 target, which was 80% in the original act, but it got changed to 100% by Theresa May's government. So when you hear net zero, that was an amendment to the Climate Change Act. It was incredibly effective. It was a 3-year campaign that was led by Friends of the Earth, but a huge coalition of all the NGOs and charities you'd expect, and enormous numbers of people writing to their MPs. It was absolutely brilliant. And the Climate Change Act was the first in the world. It has had an amazing effect. I mean, gigatons upon gigatons upon gigatons of carbon emissions saved because of it. And you would have thought at the beginning, you know, this is way too ambitious. There's no way any government would ever agree to a law that binds them and forces them to continue to reduce emissions. But, you know, this is people power. It really does work. Now, I've worked on more legislation like this, but you know, these are just a couple of examples. But really, they are effective. So it's really about you. We need your help. We need you to keep helping. And these are the main things you can do. So please join if you're not already signed up. And there's the link. We'll obviously stay in touch with you, keep you updated, tell you pertinent actions to take at the right time. Please write to your MP And if your MP does not support, or if your MP says no, or if your MP fobs you off, then keep writing. Be persistent, be polite, but please be persistent. I have seen persistence pay off over and over again. And please also, when you receive any reply, and I mean any reply from your MP, share it with us, because we can help you. Often what looks like a reasonable reply from an MP is actually not so reasonable, and we can help explain why to you and suggest further replies back. Recruit. We need more people. We need more supporters. This campaign needs more supporters. So please urge your friends, your family, your neighbors, the postman, the milkman, everyone to sign up to the campaign. And then there's meetings. We have been having really, really great virtual meetings, obviously, at the moment, where a group of local constituents go and meet with their MP. I've been sort of facilitating some of them. We had a really great one, interestingly, with a Treasury Minister last week. It was about 50 people turned up, and he was blown away. He was absolutely astonished. I think he was expecting about 3 or 4 people. And he said, yep, I'm going to help. You know, I've supported it in principle. And that was absolutely brilliant. These meetings where a group of people go and meet with their MP can be very effective. So please do that. We can help you. We've got a guide on that. We call them virtual visits at the moment. So, you know, we can help get you together with other people in your constituency. So please do that as well. And then a fifth thing, which still is actually remarkably effective, is write to your local paper. So promote it by writing to your local paper. Write if you want to the national paper. That gentleman, Robin Russell-Jones, I mentioned earlier, scientific advisor to the Air Quality Group in Parliament, he wrote a letter to the Financial Times a couple of weeks ago, which got in, which basically said the government, you know, they've got their green plan, and that's great, but they should be backing the local electricity bill. So there's some things you could do. There's always more you can do, but if you could do those things, that would be amazing. So that's enough talking from me, I think, for now. It would be great to hear from you. And we're going to have Mike's actually going to sort of facilitate. And I think we've got quite a lot of questions in the chat. So Mike.
We do indeed. Yeah, nice one, Steve. There are quite a few questions to go through. I think we might be able to answer all of them. If we don't get around to all of them, then you can email us afterwards and we'll get back to you ASAP. The first question I've picked is from Roz Kent, who wants to know who is going to pay for local power stations. Would you maybe like to elaborate on that, Roz?
Presumably, we're not going to buy little bits from all the producers, are we? You did say something about that, Steve, in your talk, actually. So I wondered if we would have sort of mini power stations just for local consumption, combining all the renewable energy sources locally.
Effectively, yes. So if you remember some of those pictures I showed you, where there was the one with the little hydro unit in the river behind the group, and then there was others, you know, with solar panels or wind turbines. So that will be primarily the actual physical infrastructure that gets built. And yes, as you sort of alluded to, yes, it can be potentially, it could be sort of pooled into the energy offering of a local supplier, a community energy supplier. Where will the money come from? Well, there's a number of ways, but one of the most common ways we envisage is that a community energy group would be able to say, okay, great, now we can sell directly to local customers. Right. So and the costs are proportionate. So it will work. We can make it a business model that works. So we predict that, you know, if we have this many customers, this much money will come in. We will then use the revenue over time to pay back loans, or indeed pay back crowdfunding that we've gathered to build the new renewable infrastructure. And we have had, as I said, those case studies we've done, we've had community energy groups say exactly that. So that one up in Aberdeen that I showed the picture of, they have said, we would love to build a second Archimedes screw, you know, hydro device in the river. That would mean we generate about double. But we can't make the funding stack up for it at the moment. But if we could sell to the local community directly, then we believe, and if the costs doing so were proportionate, then we believe we would receive enough revenue, and we would be able to then make a case, borrow the money, and build that extra bit of renewable generation. And then you multiply that across the country, and that's what we'll see the huge potential realized.
Thank you.
Great. So next up we have Ewan Scott, who asks, would it be fair to say that part of the solution is technical in terms of creating a smart grid that allows electricity to be metered out and metered in?
Yes, that is part of it. Yes. Interestingly, I was talking last night with someone from National Grid, who's an engineer, so sort of an expert in the system, and he said he was very clear. He said it's not a technical challenge. It's not an engineering challenge. It is the rules. It is the politics that is sort of standing in the way. And that's again why we're doing what we're doing. So yes, now of course, Ofgem may, when they figure out and implement exactly how the new process will work, they may look to the fact that there are things like smart meters. There's a second version of smart meter coming. Those kind of technical things, but that's why we've given the duty for those details to be left up to them.
Great, I hope that answered your question, Ewan. Next up we have Peter, who asks, how is community energy defined exactly?
So the bill doesn't define community energy, and it doesn't need to. The bill talks about the ability for local generators to supply to local people, and local would just be based on a geographic area in the current legislation. But the key thing is to have, in the current drafting of the legislation, but the key thing is to have proportionate costs. So what we really just want is costs to be proportionate, and that would then make the community groups that I showed you, if they wanted to build more generation, that would make it viable, or indeed new community projects to start, it would make it viable. So it's a bit like the analogy with my microbrewery in the van. You don't need to say, oh, microbreweries must be this big and they can't be any bigger. All you do is you simply create a situation where the costs faced by any brewer, be they tiny or medium-sized or massive, you just make those costs proportionate, and then they at least have the ability to exist at whatever scale.
Great. Okay, next up we have Chris Stewart Bennett. What is the likelihood that this bill, as currently phrased, would result in already existing direct supply agreements that community organizations have already set up with large consumers, such as schools and council buildings, being hit with additional costs, rendering a lot of them financially non-viable?
Okay, so the bill does not seek to change those existing relationships. We obviously would not want that to happen. I don't, because it will be up to Ofgem to implement the process. I would certainly expect that they wouldn't create a situation that suddenly made those projects financially unviable. But that is actually it's a very, very good point. And there is going to be, like I alluded to in what I was saying earlier, there's going to be more detail added to the bill, and that is just the sort of detail that needs to be potentially needs to be added to make sure that if that is a loophole, that is firmly closed.
Great. Okay, just have one pop up from Kate in the chat box. Is fuel poverty directly addressed in the campaign?
So this is a campaign to try and unblock and unleash that huge potential for community renewable energy generation. We want the knock-on benefits to happen as well, and we believe that if we get the rules right, then the knock-on benefits will happen. But we are just focusing on making those costs proportionate, changing the rules to make them proportionate. We aren't trying to directly legislate to stop or to eradicate fuel poverty, even though that, of course, is something very, very important and should should be campaigned for.
Great. So we have a few people reacting to that. No. Okay, so Will Parry would like to know a bit more about Powerful People as an organization and who funds us, pays our wages.
Sure, yes, no, fair question. We have 5 paid staff, 4 of whom are here this evening. The other one is Ron. Martin Williams works pro bono. Our costs are obviously quite modest because we're a small organization. We receive almost all of our income as grants from UK registered charities and foundations. I won't list them all, but just a few. The Polden Puckham Charitable Foundation, the Marmot Charitable Trust, the Network for Social Change, the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. And there is one US-based trust, which is called the Tides Foundation, who also have made grants. And that's really largely through Patagonia, the outdoor brand that's come. We also receive small donations from individuals, our individual supporters, and that's obviously fantastic. But they, at the moment, make up a minority of our income, and that is it. We receive nothing from industry. We receive obviously nothing from government or any political parties. Oh, one other thing to add, if I may. We are not a charity. We are a limited company. We did look at setting up as a charity, but obviously, we are directly campaigning politically because we're trying to change legislation. Even though we're not party political, we always seek cross-party support. And the way that charity law works is you can campaign politically, but it's unclear how much you can campaign politically relative to other activities you do. And so in order to make sure we could really focus on this campaign, that was why we set up not as a charity.
Thanks for clearing that up, Steve. Okay, so Trevor Braun says the government will come under a lot of pressure from current energy suppliers to prevent the bill from progressing, and they bow to pressure. Trevor, if you maybe want to comment a bit more on that, or?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Really, it's just like so many good ideas that get quashed simply because the government take a hard line, and other MPs lose the ability to act rationally sometimes, and they don't end up supporting things that they clearly should. So that's my concern, really.
Yep, it's a fair concern. Just first to say on the sort of incumbents you mentioned at the beginning, and the big energy companies. So one piece of good news is that one of the energy utilities, Good Energy, who appreciate are not one of the largest, but nevertheless, this will affect them. They, a few months ago, publicly supported the bill, which is very remarkable. So that's encouraging. We've had discussions with Octopus, and I've even been approached and had discussions with people at E.ON, who are one of the big utilities. And those discussions have not been hostile. They have been constructive. Now we'll see where they go. I'm not saying E.ON are going to come out and back the bill, but whether they do or not, and this is coming on to your second point, the way that you make sure the government do something that you think is a good idea is you mobilize enough grassroots support. and you put pressure on them and you put pressure on MPs, that's how it wins. And those two examples I gave you, the Doorstep Recycling Act and the Climate Change Act, government was completely opposed to both of those and to all the other campaigns that I have worked on, all of which, by the way, have succeeded. And it's because of very large numbers of people lobbying their MPs persistently that the government then turned around and said, okay, and said yes. I mean, think of the great campaigns in history, like universal suffrage and the abolition of slavery. We know how they won. They didn't win because the government went, oh, well, this is a good idea. We just like it. They won because of people putting a lot of pressure on, public support, and it's incredibly effective. Will it work? I don't know. I hope so. I think it will. I think there's enough of us. We are growing. I mean, the momentum is impressive. Over a third of the House of Commons says to me that we can do it, but we've obviously just got to keep pushing, all of us.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And I'm with Ecotricity. Should I be writing to them to ask them to offer their support as well?
Yeah, please do, Trevor. I appreciate if you did. That'd be great. But I would emphasise above that, it's your MP who's the one you really want to put your time into.
Yeah, I have already written to my MP, so yeah, when I get a response, I'll forward that through to you.
Thanks. Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Trevor. Okay, so I had an interesting comment from Rachel Waggett, who is a member of a community energy company, I believe. Rachel, if you're there, would you like to speak a bit more about your experience as a member of a community energy group?
Hi there. Yes, I'll jump on very quickly. We have a community energy company in our village, Lymm, in Cheshire. It's been set up now since about 2015, and we have got solar arrays on each of the 4 primary schools in our quite large village. We sell the energy to our schools at a discounted rate, but obviously the schools are empty in the summer when we're generating most of the power. We can only make these schemes work because we managed to get the feed-in tariffs. We managed to get them on the schools before the feed-in tariffs disappeared. Can't install on any more community buildings because we can't make it work because in the summer, that's when they're using the least electricity. So this could be potentially a game changer for us. Although I am slightly concerned that whether our shareholders so our shareholders do have consideration of us operating as a supplier, given that we're a very small organisation and there's only a certain amount of time that you can actually give up to this as volunteers.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. And so first to say, the bill is not going to prevent what you're currently doing. And that kind of thing that's happening with other community energy groups, obviously that's great, and that can continue. In terms of, I really appreciate that you also sort of said, your volunteers and the effort that would be required if you were actually to set up as suppliers to local customers, obviously going to be substantial. But you may not be you personally, but you won't be volunteers anymore, because there will be revenue coming in from customers, and that you can have staff, and you'll need staff, and that's fine. That's good. That's what we want. That's where some of those local jobs will come from. So there's going to be a degree of professionalization of community energy as a result of this, which I think is essential if we're going to go from the sort of 280 megawatts to 3,000 to 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 megawatts of generation. There's no way around it. You can't. There just aren't enough wonderful, brilliant volunteers out there to set up that level of community energy.
Well, it would certainly make a massive difference to our revenue streams if we were able to make the most of the summer months. We're set up to benefit the community, so obviously we're taking a reduced income from the schools, but that would mean that we could develop more schemes. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. And we want to, and that's, I mean, it's schools are such a great example as well, because obviously, you know, your example is you're not alone, it's everywhere. And these schools with solar, you know, the number one time when the solar is really kicking out electricity is the summer, when the schools aren't being used or hardly being used. And, you know, we're trying to create, well, it would create a situation where then that could be sold on to the local houses that literally could be next to the school.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. So it is 8 o'clock now. We've had a few people drop off who have other calls, but we still have 75 people with us. So if you want to stick around, the questions are still flooding in.
Let's keep going.
None of the Power People team have any plans, so let's keep going. So question from Brian McLean. Would a separate distribution infrastructure have to be set up, or would it somehow go into the grid?
So this would be across the grid. The grid is expensive, and it's already there. So yes, there are examples where, sometimes if perhaps you have a large industrial unit that really uses a lot of electricity. Interestingly, some of the new data centers, the gentleman I was talking to last night from National Grid was saying that some of the new data centers are sort of single buildings that are requiring a lot of electricity. So there are a small number of examples where some community renewable generation can directly be cabled in to something like an industrial unit and just sell directly. But in the vast majority of circumstances and situations across the UK, it would be the grid. It would be the existing wires. Which is why, just to mention again, or reiterate again, having 2 of those 6 regional grid monopolies, they're the ones who run and own and manage the local wires, having them support the bill is really quite significant, because it is going to impact on their infrastructure.
Great, thanks, Steve. So we have a question from Ewan Scott again. Do you think electrification of heat and transport will strengthen the argument for local supply, as it may reduce the level of grid reinforcement required?
Yes, absolutely, definitely. And what it also really what it really shows is we need a lot more generation. We need so much more generation. The estimate is 2 or 3 times more electricity generation than we currently have. I mean, it's obviously good that things like electric vehicles are being pushed harder, but we can't have that energy coming from fossil fuels. And at the moment, that's the course we're on. We have got to transition fast, and that's obviously why we're trying to change the rules in this way.
Great. So Roz Kent has asked, could you provide a template letter to write to my MP or the newspaper?
We've got, so I'm really glad you've asked this. This is a great question, and perhaps I should have even covered it, but so I'm really glad you've asked. It is really good if you write your own letter to your MP, write it in your own words. We've got suggested points that you can make on our website. There's a Write to Your MP page, so go there and have a look. But it is so much more effective if you use your own words. The key thing to say is simply, please support the local electricity bill, or if they do, please promote the bill in Parliament. But the rest of it, again, using your own words, it really is so much better. So we don't provide templates, and that's a decision we've taken carefully. We don't have anything specifically with regards to writing to the local paper, and I'm glad you've mentioned that. And we will definitely provide some suggestions. But again, I think we'll do points rather than a sort of template letter. But again, you know, it need only be something short and simple. Put it in your own words. It's always better when you put it in your own words.
Yes. I was just worried about the facts, being absolutely certain about them, but that could be solved by your local points suggestion.
Indeed. And if you or if anyone else feels they're not sure about the facts, then please show us your draft, either a letter to paper or what you write to your MP, and we will help you. We'll comment on it. We'll make sure that any facts are correct and so on.
Good idea.
We're here to support you. We want to support you. That we are enablers. That is our key role here, is to facilitate and coordinate and help you to be effective at promoting the campaign and pushing your MPs.
Thank you.
Got another question from Kate, coming back to the issue of fuel poverty again, but also wider social justice. So RE social justice campaign angle, don't you think this has real potential to get support and engagement on the environment from people who have too much else on, worrying about the end of the month, not the end of the world? Is there some reason you wouldn't do that? Justice is said to be cross-party, leveling up.
Yeah, and I think some of the support we're seeing is not just people who are concerned about climate, but people who are concerned about the costs of energy, but also they want to see benefits in the community. I think that's one of the things that really grabs people. And I wonder that really that might grab more people across the country. But either way, yeah, it's definitely, it really helps with that broader appeal. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Nigel Hargreaves asks, there are currently a number of government-funded smart local energy system trial projects up and down the UK. How can you ride on the results from these?
They're good. They show it can be done, but it needs to be done everywhere. So a lot of those projects are special exemptions to the existing rules. Ofgem have something they call the sandbox, regulatory sandbox. So you literally imagine a child playing in the sandbox. So it's sort of outside, is given a sort of a small area where they can do what they want. And that's literally what some of those projects are. They are allowed to essentially break the rules. And that's fine with pilot projects, but obviously we don't want, we need this everywhere. It's clear, the evidence is clear. The government report themselves back in 2014, shows it can be done everywhere. So we need the rules to change. But yeah, they are helpful, definitely. There's a couple of other interesting schemes that have happened. There's one actually with Good Energy down in Cornwall, where people are buying directly from a turbine, and there's another, I think, or it might be some local turbines. There's another good one in North Wales, in Bethesda, where basically there's communities are pooling their demand in the town, and they're buying electricity from the local hydro generation. And then there's other schemes as well, but those examples that I just gave, they are reliant on an existing national utility to work with, to come along and say, all right, fine, we'll provide the various bits of support and technical expertise, etc. Which it's never going to happen at scale. Unless you change the rules, you're not going to get it at scale.
Steve, it's Nigel here. Can I say something?
Please.
Yeah, sorry. I hear what you're saying, but these trials are still under trial, as it were. Yeah, one or two of them may require regulatory sandboxes, but they're facing fundamentally the same problems that the setup of the proposed local electricity bill will face. That is, you need to have code changes, regulatory changes, metering changes, all kinds of things that facilitate a local electricity market to actually take place. And then once that's available, there's the question of, so what function does it perform? Does it include local balancing of the supplies, as well as a local market for community and small scale generators to sell and buy into? Does it include flexibility services to the DNO wide system? All these kinds of questions come out of it. So what I'm suggesting is, by tracking the results of those trials, you may add more fuel to your arguments and be better informed about how to go through Parliament with them.
I see. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Nigel. And I completely agree. And just to add to what you've said, and give a bit more context for others, one of the big costs involved is to do with balancing, as you mentioned. There are grid codes that are currently controlled by the largest utilities. Interestingly, not a public body, or not by Ofgem, but by the largest utilities that are essential for balancing the grid. And if you're another company that wants to sell your electricity directly to people, to customers, so if you want to be a licensed utility, you have to adhere to those grid codes, and they are complicated. There are thousands of pages of them. You need technical experts, you need sophisticated computer systems, and obviously that is one of the things that creates these very significant costs. Now, at the moment, as I say, they're controlled by the incumbents, the largest utilities. And Ofgem, as part of implementing this process, may well say, well, that's clearly not working, and we need them to be controlled by the regulator. And we need to...
Indeed. I mean, in fact, I think probably the last thing we want is the regulator to control anything, as they seem so incapable of moving with the times. But having made the space available for, say, smart local energy companies to do that, that would be a step in the right direction. Because at the moment, the problem, one of the key problems is actually in the metering infrastructure. To a supplier, the meter is the customer. However, behind the meter, there are so many devices that can, say, for example, vary the demand on the grid that could be utilized for flexibility and so forth, that aren't recognized just because of the fact that the system is set up to only deal with meters. So metering will be a key technical challenge to sort out to enable a much smarter and flexible grid that we all recognize is required to actually come into being.
I agree. I would like to say one thing about Ofgem, the regulator, and you grumble about them, and you're not the first person who clearly understands a lot about the system who grumbles about them. But in their, if everyone could just mute if they're not talking, please, that would be great. But in their defense, Ofgem's resources come from what is decided by government, and Ofgem's parameters of operating and what they must do and what they can't do come from, ultimately, the laws that are laid down by Parliament and the rules that come out of government. And so they must operate within those. So that's, and again, that's why obviously we are trying to give them new rules and new duties so that they will hopefully perform better.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel.
Will Parry, I believe you've had your hand up for a while, if you're still there.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. My understanding is that Ofgem are instigating, or have started instigating, a review of the regulatory framework that governs DNOs and the switch from DNO to DSO as is now. From my understanding, wouldn't there be room for this kind of facility within the RIIO-2 framework? What we're looking at is use of system charge, isn't it? Really, that's the prohibitive bit of any power purchase agreement, I suppose. Yeah, I was just thinking it might be simpler to lobby the DNOs rather than 650 odd MPs.
Well, it's not the only. I mean, you're right. The new DSO or distribution service operators, I believe is what it is, where these regional monopolies, just for the benefit of others who perhaps don't know the jargon. So, you know, these regional monopolies that own the wires, the physical infrastructure of the wires across the grid in the regions, and run them and are responsible for their infrastructure and so on. Yeah, they are. The plan is to change them and the rules that govern them and what they must do. And the intentions are good. It is about trying to increase distributed generation and how projects can connect and so on. But they aren't where that's not the only source of the costs that make it impossible for a smaller scale, a community energy group to sell directly to local customers. And so that's why we've gone for the legislative approach, because we need to create the whole new framework. We need to make sure Ofgem do it fully and properly. If we just lobbied, and also the other thing is the DNOs, they're not elected. So we could lobby them as hard as we want, but they could just say no. Whereas our MPs, you know, are democratic representatives. So that is a pressure point that really works.
Yeah, it's an honest question, but but yeah, if you lobby for the changes to the regulatory framework through this RIIO-2 review that's going on, then it does become, it would form part of the regulatory framework that governs how what will be by then the DSO, how they operate. But yeah, I'm just curious as to your target lobby. That's fine. Good. I'm happy with that.
Okay. Well, I mean, we are actually, despite what I said, we are lobbying these DNOs. Like I say, I mean, the reason 2 of them are backing it is because we lobbied them. But I think what you're saying about, you know, these new rules to try and make them different and improve, that's complementary to what we're doing. It may mean that part of the work is already done, and that's good. That's complementary.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Okay, so we've just got a few more for you, Steve. David asks, are there any other countries that have adopted anything similar that can be cited to MPs?
Oh, yes. Oh, there are so many great examples. I'll talk a little bit about Germany. So they have local supply rights in Germany. We have about 60 companies that we can go to buy our electricity from here. Germany, it's about 1,000. It was over 1,000. Almost all of them are locally owned. But in Germany, they also have the ability to actually, particularly in municipal areas, to come together as a citizenry and to actually buy the local grid, so to buy the physical wire infrastructure and own it, and it sort of becomes a giant municipal cooperative. Very, very different and fascinating what they do there. But the reason we don't emphasize that heavily to MPs is, you know, what you sometimes get is, oh, well, Germany's completely different to us, and you can't, you know, it's not fair to compare. And we've initially, I did talk about Germany a lot more a couple of years ago when I first launched this. But I found that actually what got the best response was talking about us, talking about, you know, the potential that we've got, talking about the great examples of the existing community energy groups that we've got. But I mean, by all means, some MPs respond very well to, you know, some MPs are astonished and outraged almost when they say, what, if Germany's got 1,000 suppliers and we've only got 60? That's terrible. So yeah, I don't want to put you off saying that to your MP. Yeah, and I could go on. I mean, there's some fascinating examples in America. There's some schemes in New York. I mentioned Denmark already. But yeah, I mean, we're very centralized in comparison to these examples. Yeah. There is, if you look on our website, there is some more detail in some of the blogs we've got. If you look in the MP briefing as well, there's some more detail in there.
Great, thanks, Steve. Sorry, John, did you have your hand up? John Chater?
Yeah, that's right, yes. Here in Mid Devon, one of our problems for having a community wind turbine is the lack of capacity on the local network, and it needs more infrastructure put in. And I'm just wondering, that must apply to a lot of small, facilities to generate power. We need some way of putting pressure on the big, sort of Western Power, for example, and other companies.
Well, Western Power Distribution are one of the 2 regional monopolies that have backed the bill, so they're already on board. But your point is absolutely right. This will mean that for some areas there's going to be upgrades to the infrastructure needed. Better wires, maybe some thicker cables, maybe some of the transformers. The software as well is probably going to help a lot, balancing it more efficiently. But in other areas, there's actually quite a lot of spare capacity. In quite a lot of areas in the north, because of deindustrialization and the decline of heavy industry, some of the wire systems up there have got lots of capacity, as I've been told by experts. So, it's going to be different, but it's no reason not to do it. And another thing to mention is these DNOs, and they come up a lot this evening, these regional monopolies, they make eye-watering profits. And they have been for many, many years. Almost no one knows about them. Most MPs don't know about them. They make 30% yield. It's incredible the profits they have been making for many, many years as basically local monopolies. And that's not right. If revenue is coming in excessive, it needs to be spent on upgrades. Well, it needs to be. I mean, we've got to have more renewables.
True.
Great, thanks, John. So we're coming up to 8:30 now. Maybe we should start rounding things off, but we've got a couple more to go, Steve. I would just say to everyone, if we didn't get around to answering your question, if you could please, well, you've already put one in the chat box, a lot of you, but if we haven't answered your question yet, then feel free to reply to one of the emails that I've sent you in the past week, and we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. So a final question from Gareth, Steve. Capacity issues with the local network may limit the embedded generation potential. Who would pay for the infrastructure upgrade necessary?
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, as it stands, it would be down to the DNO, to that regional monopoly that runs the grid, as it stands at the moment. Now, it is possible that the legislation, that the bill could be amended so that government funds, so that it could come out of general taxation. I mean, that's how we pay for the roads. So that's how we, the water system and the gas system and so on. But at the moment, it would be those regional monopolies.
Yeah, it's Gareth Jones here. I'm chairman of Niogwen in Bethesda. Just responding to that, I agree with you. I think in Wales here, we might have an alternative, which is maybe to get the Welsh Government to support some of the infrastructure upgrade necessary, because it is a real problem.
Yep, and you're not the first person who I've heard say, it's really frustrating, and local projects haven't happened just because the wires can't take the capacity, or the substations aren't right or whatever. I mean, there's no way around it, and there's no point pretending. There's going to need to be money spent to improve some of the network, not all of it, but some of it. But the benefits are worth it by far. And I mean, this is no MP has said, it's the network upgrading costs that are making me say no to this. So yeah, I mean, if you think something's worth it, then you pay for it. As simple as that, ultimately.
Right.
Great. Can we leave it there, Steve? If you have some closing remarks.
I would, yeah, all I want to do, I mean, first of all, thank you very much for coming along, and so many great questions. I liked how they got quite technical. I hope it wasn't too technical for those of you who maybe aren't as technical. I would just want to go back and re-emphasize that it is only with action from yourselves that we will succeed with this. So please do help. And I'd also like to say thank you to Mike for your efforts this evening. It was great to have your help. So yeah, thanks very much, everybody. And do keep in contact with us. Do let us know if you want to ask any more questions.